Hello, welcome to the 2021 Chinese Canadian Leaders Summit. My name is Teresa Woo Paw, and I'm the chair for Action Chinese Canadians Together Foundation. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. They were the original occupants of this land and continue to be here to this day. The recent discovery of 215 remains near the Kamloops Indian Residential School that conjured the griefs and distresses first to the Indigenous and Canadians as settlers to this land, newcomers, or for generations, remind us the importance of the reconciliation, as outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. The Chinese Canadian community has a unique tie with the Indigenous communities that started during the building of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, when Chinese laborers who were given the most dangerous tasks, and many were injured and just left to die, were nursed back to health by Indigenous peoples. And that unique tie lasts to today. This particular aspect of the limited documented history is what was shared on the day of the government's apology to the Chinese head tax that I remember the most about that day. As a settler, an immigrant, but also as fourth generation of my family in North America, descendant of the paper sun, and member of a family endured decades of separations and hardships due to the Chinese head tax and exclusion acts, that instilled in me an understanding on the generational impacts of racist policies and the fundamental need for systemic change to achieve real and sustained transformation. I hope everyone has enjoyed some networking time this morning and that you are liking the AirMeet platform, something that's new to me, my new learning. When we were planning for our second summit after our inaugural summit in 2019, we were definitely not planning a virtual conference. We had to cancel our plan last year, thinking we can have an in-person summit this year, yet here we are. Despite all of that, I believe we have a very strong program this year, and I hope you guys are as excited about it as I am. ACCD Foundation's Leader Summit aims to bring together intergenerational Chinese Canadian leaders from across Canada, representing our nation's social, political, and art scenes to address the underrepresentation of Chinese Canadians in civic leadership roles, to inspire and empower current and emerging leaders, capture and share lived experience, learnings, and recommendations for leadership growth and advancement from a Chinese Canadian perspective, to emerge with a collaborative action plan for concrete changes. We hope that you'll gain insights on the needs and benefits of civic leadership, make meaningful connections, and see where the opportunities are. These 4 sessions build on one another, and I hope by the end of the summit, you would be inspired to lead. The 5 founding members started this conversation in 2015 to examine why and how to enhance civic engagement of Chinese Canadians. After all, we have the second lowest voter turnout rate in this country. This led to the formation of the foundation in 2017, the consultations in 2018, and development of our Aspire to Act training program, and the 2019 inaugural summit, when we brought together 100 Chinese Canadians from 5 cities to explore the subject of civic leadership. Now in 2021, many of those who were at the 2019 conversation are now playing an active role in putting this year's summit together for the almost 300 of us from practically throughout the country. I cannot be more blessed, inspired, and proud of our 2021 team. We couldn't have made this summit happen without our sponsors, and there are many. But I would like to introduce to you today Mohammed Hashim from the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, that is a platinum sponsor. So Mohammed Hashim is the Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and the founding advisor for the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. He also sits on the Board of Trustees of the United Way of Greater Toronto. Mr. Hashim has worked as a labor organizer and human rights advocate for over a decade, dedicating his career to supporting equity, inclusion, and empowering communities. As a senior organizer with the Toronto and York Region Council, Labor Council, Mr. Hashim advocated many anti-racism initiatives as well as other issues. He's dedicated to developing public policy that addresses systemic discrimination and has created opportunities for marginalized communities through fellowships and community benefits agreements. Over to you, Mohammed.
Well, thank you for having me, Teresa. Once again, my name is Mohammed Hashim. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe and Chippewa peoples, and the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently the territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I first want to say that the investment in leadership development is not just valuable. I'm proud to be able to have the Canadian Race Relations Foundation support the good work of the ACT Foundation. I know Teresa is a driving force of this organization, but she's also a driving force at our organization at the CRF, where she plays an incredibly pivotal role in determining the future of our organization. So thank you, Teresa, for everything that you do, not just for us, but for the community as well. I want to tell you a quick story. I know I have just a couple of minutes, but in 2015, I brought together about 50 young people. We met in the bottom of a mosque basement to talk about what they wanted to see in the next federal election. And they talked about jobs, they talked about housing affordability and transit. They also talked about Islamophobia, and they also talked about how they didn't feel like they were seen. So we organized a national debate. We brought those issues forward. It was incredibly successful. But then it also left a lingering taste in a lot of people where we knew we talked about the issues, but we didn't address how they felt invisible to power. And so 2 years down the line, we thought about it. We created this thing called the Muslim Youth Fellowship at Toronto City Council, which is a small program. We started off with, I think, about 14, 15 young fellows. We trained them for 3 months every weekend on, political organizing, understanding the system, communications work, just strategy around, how does politics and power move. And then for 3 months afterwards, we send them to go work for the mayor of Toronto and city councilors. But what came out of that, and after I think about 50 people have graduated out of that program, were a few things. One is, half of them are still working in politics, 3, 4 years, 5 years down the line, and they've brought more people. They also expanded the program from the Muslim Youth Fellowship to create a Black Youth Fellowship, a Filipino Youth Fellowship, a Tamil Youth Fellowship, and now they're looking to create a Chinese Youth Fellowship as well. But beyond that, I think that what was the magic sauce that happened during those was we created a network of people where, the presenters that came got to know the participants. So when there was a job opening in their offices, they sent it over. When they needed a reference for something, one of the fellows could reach out to one of the presenters or even one of their other fellows to say, I need a reference to do this job or that job. And what was really important was that they created an ecosystem around them of support. And I think that, the real miracle is not just the network is crazy, but it was the relationships. Those who have walked the same journey know the footsteps of those both in front and behind, and can sometimes guide others and look to guide those behind them. I hope this summit is the start of a new journey for many of you, wherever you are on your leadership journey, whether you are someone ahead and you're looking to pull people with you, or you're looking ahead of you and you need a leg up and you're looking for people to take you there. I hope this is an opportunity where you can get to know each other, build some relationships, and carry the work forward. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Mohammed. I see there's certainly certain elements of your program and what we're trying to do here in common. But if I haven't told you so, I do intend to pick your brain more on that initiative. So thank you very much for your support and joining us today. Thank you. So for those of you who are attending the summit for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about ACCT. ACCT was founded in 2017 with the aim to contribute towards Canada's vision for an inclusive society. And we do this by advancing Chinese Canadian civic engagement and leadership development, creating community resources and building capacity, and furthering education on racial equality of minorities, including Chinese Canadians. One of our founding members, the Honorable Vivian Poi, also the first Chinese Canadian female senator, truly believes in the importance of ACCT and the work that we do. She will be attending the sessions throughout the next 2 weeks. So please keep an eye out for her. And I'm sure that she'll be an inspiration for many. She also sent a greetings video to welcome you all. So let's play it now.
Welcome to the 2021 Chinese Canadian Leaders Summit. This summit is specifically designed for you. We have 40 volunteers working tirelessly in the past few months, designing a program that is engaging, interactive, and inspiring. Over the next 4 sessions, you'll be looking into the past and the future, discussing what the leadership needs are for younger Canadians. Please do enjoy the next 4 sessions. Your being here means that you have taken the first step to build a more equitable Canada. Don't forget that we're still recruiting for leadership cohort, where if you are ready to serve in the civic leadership role, we're here to help make that a reality. Please talk to our staff to learn more. I'm happy you're attending this summit because you aspire to be leaders in Canada. Enjoy yourself at the 2021 Chinese Canadian Leaders Summit.
Thank you, Vivian. I'm so very, very blessed, and ACCT can always count on your wisdom and your support. Now I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime and co-chair of this summit, Patty Pond, my good friend. I hope you enjoy your time, everyone, and I look forward to meeting you all during the networking session.
Many thanks, Teresa. Partner in crime is probably a really great description of all of the things that we've been involved in over many, many years. But I have to say, being involved and being engaged with ACCT, and in particular the Leadership Summit, has really been one of the great opportunities, certainly in my career. And it's just a thrill to go through all of the people that are joining us today and will continue to join us over the 4 summit sessions. So to Teresa and the founders of ACCT Foundation, I'm really grateful for you continuing to have those sparks. You know, I often get teased in my office because when I say I have an idea, and when I do that, I always think of Teresa Woo Paw and the ways in which she has some amazing ideas and her ability to carry them out. So I think the opportunity for all of us and the lesson to learn there is that anything is possible. And when we have community and when we're together to do that, it's a really powerful force. So again, thank you all for joining us today. We're just so thrilled to have you, and my job is to do a little bit of housekeeping. So I'll be with you, checking in throughout the course of our sessions and reminding you of various elements. First and foremost, List 21 ACCT Chinese Canadian Leaders Summit. And it's just a real great pleasure, particularly our programming committee, who I think have put together just an incredible experience for all of us, a conversation. And on that front, I want to make sure that all of you know the different ways that we can connect. And first and foremost, this platform, AirMeet, is an incredible platform. And we are very, very lucky to have Donna with us, who is our guru on the technology side. And Donna, I wonder if I can just invite you to give us some more hints and tips on how to get the most out of the AirMeet platform.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Patty. So hi, everyone. My name's Donna. I've been helping the ACCT Foundation put together this virtual summit. So we're very excited and happy to have you here today with us. We're using our virtual platform AirMeet today. So you may have noticed the chat that's going off on the right-hand side. So if you haven't had an opportunity to jump in there and introduce yourself, let us know where you're from and what you're looking forward to hearing about or learning about in these next few days with us. Beside the chat, you'll also notice there's a Q&A section. So if you hop on over to that Q&A tab, you'll be able to ask or submit your questions. And when we have time later today after the panel, we'll be able to get through some of those. There's also some polls. So at the end of the day, just keep an eye out for that polls. Above that, on the right-hand side, you'll see a People tab. And if you click on that, you'll be able to see all of the attendees that are online on AirMeet at that time. If you hover over someone, you'll be able to see their location and their job title, and then you can also send them a direct message. And when you send messages, there's a Messages tab right beside People, and that's where you'll find all of the direct messages that you've sent or that people have sent to you. Throughout the sessions, we may also be giving you guys some alerts or announcements, and you can find all of those under the Alerts tab. And now under Patty and my video, underneath right down there, you'll see 3 buttons. One is a smiley face. And if you click on the smiley face, you can let us know some reactions. There's some thumbs up, some hearts. People are loving the hearts, so that's great. And then there's also a raised hands feature. So we're going to actually be using that on Saturday. And if you click on that, we may invite you to the stage and hand you the mic. You could turn on your camera and your microphone on the stage and actually speak on the stage with one of our speakers. And then beside that, there's also closed captioning. So that's closed captioning in English right off the platform. And I believe there's a few other things I wanted to let you know about. Yes. We also had our AirMeet support hour this morning. So that's just an optional session. If you wanted to log in early, we're doing that again tomorrow morning from 8 to 9 a.m. So that's a good way for you to get familiar with the platform. Our support team is on hand there and they'll walk you through everything. And then if you do have any questions or challenges with the platform or technology or accessibility or anything at all, please let us know in the chat, or you can go to the People tab and search support and then message any one of our support people there. And I believe that's all for me, so I'll hand it back over to Patty.
Thanks very much, Donna. Again, there are all kinds of volunteers online. So if you have any questions or you need any kind of tech support, just put something in the chat and they can certainly help you out. We have volunteers monitoring that chat all the time. And it's not only about needing help. If you have thoughts, ideas, questions, please be sure to put them in there. We have people who are collecting all of those ideas so that rest assured that we're hearing you and we're doing our best to collect all of that information so that we can use it to support the work and the conversations that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks. Earlier on, Donna mentioned that we have some closed captioning possibilities. Again, below my video, you can see a little gray box that says CC in it. That stands for closed captioning. And so if you'd like to have those little subtitles that run across the bottom of the screen, those are available to you through the AirMeet platform in English only. During the plenary and keynote conversations, however, we also will have closed captioning available in French and traditional and simplified Chinese, as well as a number of other languages. So if you would like to access closed captioning in a language other than English, you can do so through the Wordly application. And again, there are instructions that can be made available to you in the chat. I can see right there, there's a little links all happening in there. And our support team is certainly available to you as well to help you get connected through that platform. All of our sessions are being recorded so that if you aren't able to join us for all 4 live, they'll certainly be made available to you. And then, of course, our very special event happening later on today with the Right Honourable Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and our very own Teresa Woo Paw. That will be recorded as well and available for viewing if you can't join us in the real life and in person. If you haven't done so already, we have a Leadership Summit Network happening on Mighty Networks. Again, we'll put links in the chat box so that you can join there. It's an online conversation and exchange of information and resources that connect us not only during the summit, but in between times, so that those connections and networking that you've done in the first half hour and will make available again in the last half hour of today, you can maintain and stay connected, and maybe even work together on a variety of initiatives that may be important to you and that you have in common. And before we get underway with our events, one other thing that we just wanted to share with you and remind you of, a lot of conversations that are happening right now in the world, particularly with regard to anti-Asian racism, to truth and reconciliation, Black Lives Matter, gender equality, all kinds of issues are surfacing. And as a result, they can be difficult and sometimes uncomfortable. And we don't always agree. So one of the things that I wanted to just make sure you were all aware of is that the goal of our summit is to provide a safe space for everyone to have an open and deep dialogue. In the program booklet that was sent to all of you as registrants, we had indicated a set of guidelines that, again, we will link in the chat. The chat box will be your friend in terms of accessing any resources or links. If you miss that part of the chat, just ask for the link again and our team can provide that to you. But we wanted to remind you that it's important that in creating a safe space, we are respectful of our speakers, of our staff, of our volunteers, and especially of each other overall participating in the summit today. To ensure that safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment for all attendees, I ask that you go back and have a look at those guidelines if you haven't already done so. And again, as I said, the link is available in the chat box. In addition to the code of conduct, that's what we've called it in the booklet, I also want to state that we recognize that sometimes asking people to share in this space is a request that requires emotional labor and vulnerability. ACCT Foundation commits to the promise that there will be no retribution against people for the stories and perspectives they share, and we ask that all participants commit to the same. Any participant who uses harmful or disrespectful language or who are actively disregarding the group agreements will be asked to leave the summit. And if they choose not to leave, they will be removed. So let's keep the conversations respectful, but vigorous, kind, but thorough. And I'm sure we'll all have a really amazing experience today. Now starts the official proceedings and the official activity of today's summit. Pleasure to introduce a piece by a really wonderful spoken word and artist and poet, Chris C. Subject matter, however, is a little bit challenging. Some of you may or may not know that the rise of anti-Asian racism since the pandemic began has escalated, and as a result of it, ACCT Foundation, in partnership with many other leadership organizations in Canada, started another group called Act to End Racism in April of 2020. They are a national coalition of concerned citizens and community groups of Asian descent. The coalition was created to address the alarming increase in COVID-19 related racism, and it has now grown to over 50 in Canada in 8 provinces. One of the goals was to develop anti-racism resources to help those who are targets for racism, but also to use these resources to educate others, especially non-Asian people. Act to End Racism developed a video series and released these videos last. I encourage to note those videos. They talk about stereotypes such as model minority, yellow peril, and perpetual foreigners. The video now was the first in the series of videos released and is called A History of Silence by Chris C., which I believe will add my chat discussion today. Donna, let's play the video, please.
The first time my grandchild asks, and they will, "Where were you?" A history book will unfold before my eyes, brittle spine snapping like a leather belt, some pages yet unwritten dripping with the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors who crossed an ocean seeking a dream that turned out to be more like a myth. Where were you? When CPR foremen sent trembling Chinamen with frail fingers into the tunnels with sticks of dynamite, where were you? When head tax and immigration acts shut the door to the motherland, splitting countless Asian families down the middle like steamed pork buns, where were you? When the boat people landed in the dead of winter, promptly pushed to the ghettos like the rest of the rabble, when Nikkei fishing boats were impounded, their nets deemed a threat to wartime security, 22,000 Japanese sent to the mountains to concentrate on all the ways they weren't Canadian enough. The first time my grandchild comes to me with puffy eyes, asking me where I was the first time I got called a chink, asking me why it still hurts this bad in a country that says it welcomes us all, I will be forced to contend with all the times I've kept my head down and pulled my bootstraps up. A history of silence that speaks louder than a Hiroshima bomb. We have never been a loud people, just hardworking. After all, chopsticks and stones can break your bones, but words will never hurt you, right? So study hard, Zai. Don't talk back. We are lucky to be here, to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. Railroads and laundromats, prosperity and graduation caps. They might not love us like they love our food, but they pay our mortgages while we pay our dues. When my grandchild asks, "So what did you do?" When they knelt on a black man's neck till he died. When they trespassed and attacked First Nations healing camps. When they called it Kung Flu and spit on our grandmas at bus stops. What did you do? And where were you? When black Canadians paved the way for our emancipation. When local natives pulled our broken bodies from collapsed railroad tunnels and nursed us back to health, bending cedar and weaving bamboo. Did you fight for them when they fought for you? I want to tell them. We tried. We stood. We fought. We could. No longer only doctors, lawyers, engineers, but artists, athletes, allies, activists. Every Chinatown and Little Manila enacted defiance. Every stoic action mistaken for silence. Here we are on the shoulders of humble giants. Their guidance meant survival so that we can now speak, so we can now strive, so we can now struggle, so we can now thrive. When they ask me what I did, I want to tell them, I tried.
It doesn't matter how many times I see that video, there's always something more, some more of a tidbit that I capture, that I hear. I see that Charles has put the link to the video in the chat. I encourage you to share it. And I really encourage you to think about, where were you? Where are you right now? What is it that you can do to help reduce and eliminate incidents of anti-Asian racism and just racism, period, how to become anti-racist. And today, I think our conversation is going to really offer us some deep insight and really wonderful conversation about that. And so now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two fireside chat speakers today, Dr. Henry Yu and Howard Yang. I hope that everyone's had a chance to read Dr. Yu's paper. Again, no matter how many times I read it, there's always something else that I pick up from it. It's just so insightful and was so amazing to see words and full thoughts put to all the different ways I've been feeling during this time in particular since the pandemic began. Now, Dr. Yu is a professor at the Department of History at the University of British Columbia and principal at St. John's College. As a history professor, Dr. Yu's research and teaching has been built around collaborations with local community organizations, civic institutions such as museums, and multiple levels of government. He is passionate about helping Canadians unlearn the cultural and historical legacies of colonialism and to be inspired by the often hidden and untold stories of those who struggled against racism and made Canadian society more inclusive and just. He was the co-chair of the City of Vancouver's Dialogues between First Nations, Urban Aboriginals, and Immigrant Communities, and has served on advisory committees for formal apologies acknowledging historical discrimination and for the implementation of substantive legacy projects at all three orders of government. Dr. Yu received his BA in Honors History from UBC and an MA and PhD in History from Princeton University. He was awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012 and the Province of British Columbia's Multicultural Award in 2015 in recognition of his research and community leadership. Howard Yang in 2018 joined the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity as Vice President, Arts and Leadership, where he has just recently left but was responsible for arts, leadership, and presenting programs. Prior to Banff, Howard was Professor of Professional Practice in the School for the Contemporary Arts at Simon Fraser University and was the Director of Woodward's Cultural Unit. There, he developed a creative entrepreneurship program in the School for the Contemporary Arts and was responsible for the public, cultural, and community programs at the Goldcourt Center for the Arts. Howard has been a member of several volunteer boards and committees, most notably the Canadian Arts Summit, Orchestras Canada, Manitoba Arts Stabilization, the Canada Council, BC Arts Council Music, City of Vancouver, Vancouver Alliance for Arts and Culture, the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance, the Vancouver Foundation Arts and Cultural Advisory Committee, and a member of our very own programming committee here for this year's Leadership Summit. Please welcome Dr. Yu and Howard. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Patty, and thank you, Teresa, for your welcome message. And we're just so thrilled to get this day started and to really start our conversation. As Patty mentioned, I just was recently with the Banff Center, and I'm coming to you from Salt Spring Island, the traditional territory of the Saanich, Cowichan, and Chemainus First Nations on the Salish Seas. This morning we're gonna Henry and I are gonna have a chat, and I'm really thrilled to see you again, Henry, and looking forward to our conversation over the next 30 minutes or so. Following that, we're going to have a panel discussion, and Henry will join us on our panel. And I look forward to the way we can how your paper has sort of landed with our group that we put together. We're going to take a little bit of a break after that, and then following that, we'll have a chance for you to kind of talk amongst yourselves in some breakout sessions and really get some reflections within your thinking. So, we're going to jump right into it. First of all, Dr. Yu, I'm going to call you Henry, if that's cool with you.
I'd prefer Henry. Yeah. Otherwise, it feels like I always want to look over my shoulder for the Dr. Yu in the room.
Well, I'm so pleased that you're doing that. Now, as Teresa mentioned, when I was an attendee and participated in the 2019 Leadership Summit that was held in Calgary, and that was a great first event in terms of that. And we started planning the 2020 summit in earnest, and thinking about what next and what we do after the 2019. And actually, I was really looking forward to hosting that summit at the BAM Center. We felt that a way to kind of go next from the 2019 work was to actually bring forward some series of thought-provoking papers that was going to deepen the conversations and maybe focus our conversations a little bit more. Now, day one for us today is guided by the question: what is Chinese Canadian history, and how does it contribute to contemporary issues? Now, we actually asked you to write that paper about a year and a half ago, really, and you kind of said, "Yeah, okay, sure, I'll do that." I remember that you were very willing and open and to that. I'm actually curious at this moment. I know now we've as you know, the paper has been read now by our delegates, and we've posted it online. But what would you have written a year and a half ago, and now what you have written today? How the world has
it's changed. It's a great question. I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking some of that very same question when I started to actually put pen to paper. Not literally, obviously, I was using my laptop, but when you first asked, I think, I'm a historian, so I've been thinking about a lot of these issues of what the connection between history and now for, since I started to become a historian professionally. But I think the last year in particular, and it's not just the rise of the sort of the surge of anti-Asian, anti-Chinese, in particular racism with COVID, Black Lives Matters, the murder of George Floyd, even in this, in the last month, the discovery of those children in Kamloops Indian Residential School that never returned to their families and communities. I think what's really different, if I would put it in one word, is anger and frustration and a sense that, not enough has changed. And I think that led me to think, why? What is it that is the problem? We know from, testimonies, for instance, from so many of those survivors of residential schooling, we know that the mortality rate was high. We can't be shocked or surprised to discover those remains. We know the history. We teach it now. My kids learn about the head tax. They learn about Japanese. So why are we shocked and surprised? And, often reporters will, whenever there's a spectacular moment of violence, a reporter will phone me and say, "Hey, Dr. Yu, can you explain this? What's the context for this historically?" As if we need to have it explained to us again and again every time something happens. And I realized that, there's two things that I think I was trying to get across in the paper. One was, when you talk about white supremacy, it freaks people out. And, as if you're accusing them of being a Nazi. And so that was one aspect. It's like, so therefore we don't talk about racism in the way that has to be talked about. I think the second was that obviously education's not enough, that we're learning about that past. But I think one of the lessons that often is, implied is that was back then. And we were racist historically in Canada, and now we're not anymore. And that was really the thing that, made me angry, because that's what leads to the surprise. That's what leads to the shock. And, I've heard too many people say, "Oh, I never knew. It's so terrible. I did, this is not Canada. We can't accept this. And then yet nothing changes. And then the next, 6 months later, I get another phone call. So that's what's different this time. There's a measure of making sure that, and poor elephants. I feel terrible for elephants. But a way to get across what are actually very difficult ideas for people to accept, not difficult conceptually, actually, but difficult in some sense emotionally to accept that, we live in a country that was built around white supremacy, and we still suffer from its effects.
I just want to say to our delegates, you please use the Q&A if you're interested in asking a question. We have people monitoring the Q&A that will help me sort of manage any questions, and so feel free to put them forward as well. Before we get right into the paper, I was actually, at my first read through, I was going through trying to figure out where you were going to take this and all of that. You actually did not use the word I kept thinking you might use, and which was colonialism, which was something that we that's in our vernacular all the time right now, and yet you've not used it. I'm not to say you. I don't want to put words in your mouth already, but you avoided it. Maybe, I don't know. What was did you purposely not move into that kind of?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because it was one of the shaping choices, and I just want to say right now that I'm joining you from the unceded ancestral traditional territories of Musqueam. I'm at UBC Vancouver campus where I live and work, and
you're also in your daughter's bedroom, I think.
And I'm also in my, and you don't see the K-pop posters and the BTS and things like that. So that's good. Not that everything against K-pop. But I think one of the things about that word unceded, and for British Columbia, it perhaps has a different meaning than in other areas of Canada where there are treaties. Unceded means there's no treaties, there's no defeat, there's no battle. There's no Battle of Vancouver, where the local First Nations, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam were defeated by the British, and that's why we enjoy, their lands and resources. It was unilaterally stolen. And that idea of actually not using the term colonialism, which is, again, very abstract. And for a lot of people, they can say, colonialism, but they don't actually think through and feel, what it means in terms of where they live, the resources they enjoy, the stolen goods that have been fenced and sold and that we use all the time. And so to kind of not use the term and yet talk about those substantive ways that that continuing, ongoing colonial theft is shaping our lives. Has shaped our lives since the basically the founding of Canada, and that it's connected to who we are as Chinese Canadians or Asian Canadians of Asian descent. So you're right. It really was this choice because I was thinking, do I define it at the beginning? I'm going to define it as this kind of colonial act, the Indian Act. There's all these ways in which, in fact, it's foundational. So it's in everything we do, in every aspect of our lives. And so it was to avoid the term in order to actually understand the practical effects.
Okay, so you avoided that term, and I get it. I get why that but you, in the third paragraph, you jumped right into white supremacy.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's where it went. And you said, without dealing with white supremacy, racism makes no sense.
Yeah.
That's out of your paper.
Yeah.
So you shifted the focus from anti-racism to white supremacy.
Yeah.
What does making that shift do for us? The way we talk about racism now, your paper sort of focuses on the perpetrator.
Yeah.
So why is that important to you? And that shift, where does that come from for you?
Again, for me, a term I never used, and I know that it's been used a lot, is intersectionality, and we talk about the various ways that our who we are is affected by things like gender and sexuality. And this is another way for me of saying, just as when we try to think about sexual assault against women, if we think about sexual assault and women, who's suffering the effects primarily of sexual assault, and who is actually primarily suffering the effects of a lot of the anti-Asian violence, were women and elders, the vulnerable. If we only focus on those who are being affected by it, it's almost like pointing a finger, not at the, not at the people and the problem who are, that we have to understand in order to stop it, but continually focusing on the victim and the victimization of people. And I think that's the primary reason of shifting it over. You can't understand the effects of anti-Chinese or anti-Asian racism if you just dwell on anti-Chinese racism and who's being targeted, just as why are women being assaulted? Why is there sexual assault? So there's a parallel, excuse me, in understanding, the structural issues, the larger issues. And until we talk about it that way, we can't come up with solutions. And so in that sense, it's why in the first thing that we had to discuss in my mind was, if it's only about racism, then we get confused. We kind of think about, well, what if there's a non-white perpetrator in a racist act? Does that mean that everybody's racist and it's all equal opportunity racism? And you're racist, I'm racist, so it's a problem we can't solve. It deflects away from, it hides and ignores the normalcy of white supremacy. That's just everywhere around us.
A question to come up in the chat, which is interesting, that kind of related to which talks a little bit about. So when did you come to this acceptance that our country was built on white supremacy?
That's a great question again. Thanks for that. I think, and I'll just, there's a phrase in there about investment and success. And, when I was going to school and when I was an undergrad, just an assumption that, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer or those things that, my community, my relatives, my family, literally people would come and say, "Oh, your kid's so smart. Why isn't he a doctor?" And you could feel that kind of pressure of, what is it to belong? What is it to succeed? And I remember, basically being in my graduating year at UBC, and I didn't like history. I got to be honest. I hated dates. I can't remember dates. I'm poor material to make a historian in some ways, and yet there was something that I knew was missing. Because I grew up and I knew the story. My grandfather paid the head tax. His brothers, his father did. My parents came, and my mother met her father for the first time in her life when she was 28 years old. They were a split family. And so when she showed up in YVR, Vancouver Airport, and got off that plane in 1965, she met her father for the first time in her life. That is just, I heard stories in my family. So that was my inheritance, you could say, my history. And yet it didn't connect up with the history I'd learned in school. It didn't connect up with the self-conception. And so I think it's that gap. And unlearning this triumphant story of, Canada is about Westering settlers who are given free land to come and encouraged to settle places like Alberta and BC and, Manitoba. And oh, by the way, some Chinese built a railroad and we were racist. And that's still our history. Honestly, that's still what, children learn. And to me, that's how, that gap and the need to confront, that whole history in a different way, to tell a different set of stories that is more honest, that isn't irreconcilable, and with truth and reconciliation. And that's part of the challenge of, if we only focus on anti-Chinese racism, for instance, then it's like, well, and we are not going to deal with, in fact, this need to reconcile colonialism and the ongoing colonialism.
Not to jump to your punchline, but the whole elephant, right?
The whole elephant.
Yeah. Certainly. Before we get to that punchline, I think, or to some of the ways, you talk about the legacy of white supremacy and how I was reading your paper in terms of the rules of engagement are shifting and weighted in some way, right? I think it's how I read it. And we change laws. We create laws. We create policies. We create that. But underneath it all, what
Yeah.
nothing's changed. Is that how you read? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and if I was going to write another essay that was even more geared towards, for instance, thinking about what leadership is, and again, one of the big subjects of the summit over this week and the following weeks, what is it to lead, and what is it to be recognized as leading and making change? Because it's one thing to lead and everything's the same and you're just the best to keep it going. If your company makes money, you're going to make the most money. You're going to be number one salesperson or some way number one in terms of meeting the KPIs and the quotas and things. And boy, he's a leader or she's a leader. To me, one of the things that again I was trying to get across is, for a long time, because of exclusion and racism, it was enough to just get a seat at the table. Because that table, we weren't at the table. You weren't allowed to vote if you're Asian. You weren't allowed to be a doctor. You weren't allowed to be a lawyer. You weren't allowed to be an engineer. And then it's like when we fought for and struggled, literally fought for in both the First and Second World War for the right to just vote and be human, to be equal and treated that way, that still meant we were frozen out of all these good professions, good jobs, good neighborhoods. And so I think one of the things about getting a seat at the table, just being, looking around, go, oh, I'm here. I'm the only Asian at the table, but I've succeeded. I've been a leader. I was the first. And if you think about how many first, the first doctor, the first Asian woman to be a senator, the first this, the first that, the string of firsts, that's just getting a seat at the table. The table itself has been built to benefit a certain set of people. And I think this generation, the challenge is, getting a seat at the table is not enough. Getting a seat at the table means that we'll still have, your grandmother still, might get shoved or punched or spit on, that you may be, sitting there at the table, and yet you may know that something's wrong with the table itself. And I think right now the challenge is not just getting a seat at the table, not just to be included on a table that we've been excluded from, but the table remains built to benefit some people in an invisible way and to keep others marginal, tokenized. There's too many Asians at the table. And about 10 years ago, there was an article in Maclean's about UBC, University of Toronto, all the top universities in Canada supposedly were becoming too Asian. Well, what's it to be too Asian? When who are you threatening? What's the table built for when there's too many of you?
Is there something about, and I was just thinking about this the other day, a colleague of mine was in a conversation at a session with an African Canadian lawyer who said, we can't fight discrimination with discrimination.
Yeah.
And so, if we need to have multiple voices at the table. Is that what you're saying? Is that?
It's multiple voices for sure. That's the way we're going to remake the table. So I think that's why one of the things I hope at the end of that essay is to remember all the other people sitting, being crushed by the elephant, so to speak. That there are other legs doing other kinds of work, and it is a colonial strategy to divide and rule, to divide and manage. That we're going to get pitted against each other. It's like, oh, there's only so much funding for all of you visible minorities. We're going to put it over here in heritage and going to fight it out. We got 100,000 total. How are you going to split it up? Whereas we have 10 million over here to an art gallery that's centered all around European art. But you get 100,000. So, don't complain, or else we'll give more to that group or that group. Coming together is really difficult. And that's one of the ways that table's loaded, so to speak. So yeah, you may be sitting there at the table and there's you and there's one Latina and there's one person who's Muslim, who happens to be Asian too, but each of you is supposed to speak for your community. And how often have I heard it's like, well, the Chinese community, they can't get it together. They disagree. So how can we deal with them? How can we create a policy that works? And it's like, well, disagreement makes it impossible to work with us. Isn't democracy about disagreement? Or don't we have all these ways in which we figure out disagreements? And so there's a way in which this idea that the table is weighted against you. It depends on which profession, which sector, which area you're in. But if you're sitting at the table, I think I would urge, how's it weighted? How is it, how does it see you in a particular way? You'll only belong. It's a provisional seat at the table. You're not going to belong unless you behave in a particular way.
Right.
And if you start to see that you're threatened somehow, if there's too many of you, or as you look around, it's like, oh, how do I deal with the person who's Black? How do I deal with the person who's we need to get together in some sense and say the table is the problem, not white people. Like, this is the other thing people say, oh, you're a racist. There's actually been people who have said I should be fired from the University of British Columbia because I'm a racist, because I use the term white supremacy and therefore I'm racist against whites. It's like, it's not about individual people. It's about how the table is actually constructed and how we have to reconstruct the table.
We have a few more minutes, certainly, and I want to move a little bit to some of your ways forward and that you put forward in your paper. But one of the things, just as we kind of lead into that conversation, you talk about this sort of one of the reasons for the surge in anti-Asian violence has had such a visceral impact on so many Asian Canadians. It's this idea of fitting in. So you talked about seat at the table, and but we sit at someone else's table, right?
Yeah,
and this idea, and that, how do we change that narrative? Where's the shift happen now? What do you imagine the shift needs to be?
I am always optimistic. I'm lucky because there's 18-year-olds that show up in my classrooms every single year, and so I remain optimistic because they're optimistic. And I almost feel like if you're not connected to these new ideas, new approaches, new perspectives, then you get pessimistic and jaded. And so I'm really fortunate. And one of the things about that table is that, if you just want to make it on there, get that seat, we invest in success. I've done it. I can look back to throughout my life where it's like, okay, if you do this, you go to the right school. If you do this, you do that, then you'll belong and everything will be okay. But there's sacrifices we make. English, you got to work on English and not speak these other languages because I don't want to have an accent. And next thing you know, you're monolingual and you can't talk to your grandmother. You're describing, oh, I got a new, girlfriend or new boyfriend. It's like you can't even use abstract language to describe anything past "this is my friend." And so we end up losing connection with who we are. You literally begin to lose a sense of what you're doing. What's a success mean? Especially as you get more and more successful, it's like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
What did I give up to get onto this table? And so, I think it's up to people now, and all of you gathered here. It's like, there are different things, maybe let's make a table over here that's a strong table where people can feel safe and find their way. That may be necessary as a safe place for people to gather, to kind of talk to each other in open ways and really understand the losses, the sacrifices, and what needs to be done to perhaps protect others from having to go through that same path. For others who I think are maybe a little bit more, I wouldn't say ambitious, but perhaps have the strength to be at that table and have that loud voice and say, no, things got to change. And those are two very different paths. We can have our own tables, but maybe it is about also being loud and proud at the tables where we are Or,
No, you and I love analogies. We'll come back to the elephant in a second, but let's keep with the table discussion.
Yeah.
And the table discussion, as you recall, as you know, in our summit agenda, we have a discussion around a seat at the table, and a couple of papers that have been written on that, and to provoke the conversation. We had this discussion just a couple of days ago around, is that the table we should all be sitting at? And now we talked about the role of youth and the role that our younger generation is really taking on. You and I believe, used to come from the maybe age-old theory that we'll take care of everything. Just don't you worry about it, and everything we do will be great for our grandchildren, right? That whole. But maybe that should be turned right around now. What
it's interesting. Many of the people here may know that last week there was a national forum on anti-Asian racism that our president Santa Ono and others as part of a group, including Teresa Woo Paw and others that are involved in ACCT, Mohammed Hashim, who spoke this earlier. And one of the great things for me about that last week's discussion was we had a lot of people who had really been in the trenches, you could say, combating racism for decades. Since the 1970s, some of them. And again, Patty Pond was there, who spoke earlier. And what I think came overwhelming to all of us who are, let's say, on the wrong side of 30, is how a lot of the students, those who are in their 20s, we were talking about how, the Angus Reid poll showed that a large proportion of Canadians felt there was a generational problem in racism. It's going to take a whole generation, and we're going to solve this problem for our children, and da da da. And I remember Jacqueline Louie, who was on one of the concluding panels with Mohammed Hashim, and she said, "No, I'm going to push back and say," and there was literally a sense that no one, I think, said it out of respect. If you're not going to, don't sit there and paternalistically think you're going to solve the problem for us and make the world better for us and then gift it to us at the end of the day. It's like, here you go, young man or young woman. It was like, no, if you're not going to solve this, it's got to be solved. Get out of the way. And that sense, the palpable sense of so many of my own students, I would say some of them, is basically this idea is like with climate change. This is a problem we've been living with. You've had your crack. You didn't change it. You just got on a seat at the table. Right. You needed, maybe that was your generation, but we're not satisfied with the table. And it's like, get out of the way if you're not going to change the table. And to me, that's the most hopeful thing I got out of that conversation. You could say that forum was, there's a generation, and again, they're here gathered. I've seen sort of the median age here is a good median age, because, don't be satisfied with what we weren't able to do. I'm 54. I'm close to sort of retirement, and but I'm sitting in my teenage daughter's room, and it's like, don't sit there and listen to me tell you what we're going to do for you. If you think change needs to be faster, we need, as with climate action, just do it. Get us out of the way.
I'm going to talk about faster in a second, but I'll just say that, maybe this is, I'll just say one of the ways forward and to put the whole elephant in the room now is to go to your concluding statements around the building of alliances. And the a way in which to kind of see the whole elephant, I guess, in that sense. A colleague of mine used to always tell me, you're faster alone, but farther together.
Yeah.
And I think that holds true in what you're trying to say. What does building alliances look like to you?
I know this sounds like a truism, and we abstract this about listening, and really listening and understanding what the challenges and problems others are facing. Again, that the elephant metaphor to return, to maybe move from tables to elephants is if you can't see what's going on over on that other leg, the one that's crushing someone else, you can't figure out how to work together then, because it's going to be different. If you're Asian, it's a non-belonging. It's this, it's a sense of being foreign, and you can be born here, you can be fourth generation, but you're still, it's a provisional belonging. That sense of, I often hear people say, "Well, that's China, and I'm Chinese Canadian." It's like you're fighting a losing battle, because if you think people are going to make this distinction, and it's not a distinction, in fact, that's actually going to reinforce this idea of foreignness and not belonging, you're wrong historically. That idea that, yeah, you're a good Asian, but there's those bad Asians, and the bad Asians are those that don't belong. So it's a way, in fact, to enforce and reinforce that sacrifices in order to belong. And so one is listening and understanding, and in their words of the other people that you're talking to, and trying to find ways in which you make decisions together about how to move forward. It's not easy. And that's for all of us. And here's where, people who've been around longer, that's the hardest thing, is to take the time. As much as I also appreciate we got to get it done now, you also have to take the time to make those bridges, make those alliances strong. And that does mean not imposing your timetable on someone else.
Right.
So we all, again, people ask with Indigenous peoples, it's like, don't impose your timetable on them. They've got priorities. They have capacity issues, resource issues as well. And so sometimes also bringing resources in, if you have more, to help build alliances. Yeah. So if you've got things that others have less of, and that's the way to build a relationship, people have talked about, I don't have time to help out. And it's like, well, but it's because you've spent a lot of time making a lot of money. Then maybe it's using what you can to help build alliances, because others have more time but less money and resources. Maybe that's the way you build the alliance. It's like, let's work out where we can share resources, and time is a resource, intelligence is a resource, just savvy, canny, ways of being entrepreneurial and innovative is a resource. There's many ways in which we have things that can be shared, and that's how you build alliances.
We're running into the close of our moment together here, and before we bring on the panel onto the stage, I want to ask you one last question. I wasn't going to ask this question because I didn't see it coming, but you probably just heard yesterday that we announced that our Prime Minister is going to be joining Teresa later on this afternoon in a one-to-one conversation. My understanding, he has read your paper, and certainly was shared with him. And so my sort of question to you at this point is maybe two, but what is the role of government at this moment?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, an important. We have this opportunity.
Yeah.
And I guess if you were Teresa, what would you want to ask him?
I mean, it sounds so simple, and whether whoever's in charge, whoever's prime minister, whichever party's in charge, the government is us. I mean, that I know this sounds like a fifth grade civics lesson, but when we talk about the government as, what can they do for us? It's like, they are us. The government collects taxes from us on our own behalf. We elect those representatives. They are us. And so I often, when we talk in terms of the long history of white supremacy, the government was weaponized against people for most of our history. You could say, in many ways, it still is. Mm-hmm. And thinking about the government as weaponized, and I'll give you a very stark example, is basically discriminatory laws. If Chinese couldn't vote, then you could pass laws in the legislature that said, Chinese can't do this, Chinese can't do that. And you're not one of us. The government is a weapon used against people. That idea continues often in many people's heads. The government is the problem. The government is the enemy, as if the government's this separate thing, and the government needs to do X for us. The government is us. And so as you strategize, as you think about, and as we think about, how do we change things? Those changes are for our benefit, because the government is us. It represents us. And that sounds maybe vaguely American, Canada, in fact, did not start off as a democracy. Again, that's one of our delusions. Sometime in the late 20th century, Canada started to try to remake its image. It began as a very hierarchical top-down place, but we've remade it. And one of the things that I think is crucial for, again, any of you out there, as you think about how do we make changes, yeah, there are government processes. If you think about it as it was captured for a long time by white supremacy, it was built around white supremacy. We've got to unmake that table. Part of it is to remake government so that it does its job as being representative of the people who are Canada. And that might mean political representation, but it also might mean, why are there so many civil servants that don't look like Canada?
Yeah.
Why, for those of you who are maybe in the civil service, why is it so alienating and marginalizing that non-white civil servants leave at a higher percentage and don't make it up the ladder ranks? And the higher you go up in the civil service, the fewer and fewer visible minorities there are. Okay. So there are ways in which government is not just elected officials, it's also the civil service. And I'll end with this. The single most successful affirmative action program in history was taking the federal civil service from being Anglophone, predominantly Anglophone, within 2 generations to be majority Francophone.
Francophone, that's right.
And that is affirmative action.
Absolutely right. And we see it every day now. Henry, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you.
I really appreciate your thoughts and writing. And look forward to your next paper because I know you're already thinking about it. And I want to ask our panel to join us and on our virtual stage. We have Dr. Joseph Wong joining us right now, and hi, Joseph. Good to see you.
Hi, hello. Hi, Henry.
Hi, Dr. Wong.
My boss, Teresa, is there, and I'm waiting for Georgia to join us as well. I think as well. So I'm so pleased that we have. Hi, Georgia. Great to see you. And thank you for taking time. I hope you. I know that you've been listening. I would imagine that you have formulated maybe even additional thoughts from what you felt when you first read Henry's paper. I don't need to go in. I'm not going to go into all of your bios. We don't have a lot of time, but they're certainly available on to everyone right now. But just really to say how appreciative I am that you've taken the time to join us in this next part of our discussion. And really, I just wanted to start a little bit with some immediate reflections that each of you would have had upon reading Henry's opus, and really, and particularly if you have a particular question for Henry as well, coming out of that, maybe I'll start with you, Joseph. Any immediate reflections that you'd like to share with Henry and our delegates?
Thank you very much, Howard. I'm very pleased to meet finally Henry. Heard your name for a long time, but I believe that we have not met in the past. So when I read Henry's paper, the first good thing about Henry's paper is not that long. It is only a few pages. Great thing. Because if you have 25 pages, I don't think anyone has time to go through the whole thing. But on the other hand, you have so succinctly crystallized everything in this paper. Now, I know that I could say that because my 40 years of community activism, working on various issues, your short paper really has pointed out all the important points. First of all, I want to congratulate you, Henry, because you lead by example. That is very important. You already got a seat at the table. You are a professor at one of the best universities in Canada. Yet, you're not going to be restricted by the structural changes or the structural limitations placed on you as a model minority doing things that the white people want you to do. Okay, even at the threat of people condemning you, attacking you online or otherwise, you continue to have the courage to speak out. That is the most important thing. If anyone learn from this conference, it's the courage to speak out. And that is the most important thing. So Henry, I think that I would congratulate you to lead by example. And when I went through your paper, because of my experience in various issues, I would say that your paper has very accurately pinpointed the problem we and Chinese Canadian communities facing, or all other minority communities who are under attack in Canada, who are discriminated against in Canada. I think that we all should take a look at your paper. So the number one point that you make is the elephant in the room. Yes, don't beat around the bush. Go right into it. White supremacy. You're very right. We could have the best human rights code. We could have seats at the table, but nobody give it a damn. My grandmother, my mother would still be spared at, right? A Thai elderly gentleman who looked like Oriental or Chinese, he was murdered, he was killed. And a lot of others has happened. So I think the human rights code do not protect us. Seats at the table do not protect us. The other point is model minority. I think that it is very important that we don't get divide and conquer. The systemic and structural effects of racial exclusion, that is another point made in the paper. I think that, the structural racism is in place, the white supremacy is in place. Even we celebrated so much about a black man becoming the president of the United States, the first one, right? Obama. Could he stop anything like what we have seen in the past 5 years or whatever, the most recent George Floyd case? He cannot, right? So I think that it is legitimate for us to say we are hopeless. This system is hopeless, okay? Democracy is not the answer to the problem that we are facing. If we don't appreciate democracy, we don't know how to play the game. I think playing the game is important. I could quote you a number of cases that we went through. Right? NTW5, the old game, we will fail. Definitely. We don't want to be a model minority. So when we campaign on the streets, we raise the awareness people. When I organized the Boat People Rescue in the late 1970s, you know what we encountered on the street? Don't rock the boat. I thought that people would welcome us with open arms. No, it's not true. Okay? Don't rock the boat. You're a troublemaker. Okay? We are already given a roof in Canada. Let us be model citizens. Let us be model minorities. That is what we don't want to go into. That is what we don't want. Exactly. So, I substantiate many of what you have said and many of what you have written in the paper by actual examples. For example, the Carol Bell issue. Markham deputy mayor who said it is too Chinese, too much Chinese in the shops, too much Chinese on the street sign, too much Chinese in the neighborhoods. They are driving our backbone away. The backbone is white people. They're driving our backbone away. So that it seems as if we do not belong. We don't have a right to go into the better neighborhood or good neighborhoods. So everything that you said in your paper, I could quote 1,000 examples what I went through, what we have gone through, okay, as fighting racism and discrimination in the country. So when I was in the United Way, I was invited to go there. I don't want to be window dressing. I don't want to take up a seat at the table for just sit the first Chinese or the first visible minority at the table. So I invited the president and the chairman to a Chinese community, to a Chinese restaurant, to meet with our social workers, to let them know our problems. How could you continue to be relevant and effective if you ignored your constituents? Okay, it is not. I don't want to have a seat at the table. I want to have systemic changes. So we underwent the anti-racism changes, organization changes, not only at the United Way, but on all other organizations that we funded. That is how we changed United Way. Okay. So at the time I left United Way, 40% of United Way's board of directors are visible minorities. Half of the workforce are visible minorities. Okay, including the top executive positions. That is how we change the message. That is how we change the organization. And that is the message that you brought out, Henry. And I could quote 1,000 examples to say that this is exactly what we need to focus our attention on.
Thank you, Joseph. And of course, Henry made his paper as short as he could to not quote all the examples, but I'm sure. Thank you so much. I don't know if you will have a response, Henry, before
I just want to quickly say, I'll call Dr. Wong because I'd have that amount of respect for all he has done, and I'd love to hear from everyone else. But I appreciate everything you said, Dr. Wong, and it means a lot coming from you. In fact, so I'm a little overwhelmed, in fact, by what you've said, and I'm going to think some more and listen to others. But my deepest gratitude for your comments, Dr. Wong.
Thank you. Georgia, I wanted to bring you into the conversation here because we've been talking about a seat at the table. You fought for a seat at the table at UBC, and are sitting at the UBC Board of Governors table now, right? And but your reflections and your thoughts of Henry's paper a little bit, and also what's landing for you right now in this conversation?
Yeah, I thought it was such a phenomenal paper. And I think especially thinking about like the UBC context, especially since there are a lot of Asian Canadians in UBC, and it's the name is, it's UBC, University of a Billion Chinese, all of that. But I think what really resonated is, this is where some of the roots of the model minority myth comes from. On whose term are we deeming, who is the model minority? It stems from white supremacy and reinforcing the divide and conquer tactics, especially the way that it was weaponized against African Americans and Chicano Americans as well. And there's a lot of this, a lot of pointing towards the hardworking ethics of the Chinese Canadians, but that's not necessarily true because it's so dependent on, racist immigration policies that intentionally recruited for well-educated Asians instead of a lot of the other people that were also coming. And so when I'm kind of thinking about all of this, it really gets me thinking about all the other intersections of oppression as well, and including the oppression that exists within our own communities, especially anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism that Chinese Canadians also perpetuate. And it kind of got me thinking about my own family history that Teresa also alluded to in her beginning land acknowledgement, where my family, my great grandpa came to Canada, and he didn't have anything. He was refused service from white shop owners and refused healthcare from white doctors, but he was actually taken in by the First Nations and supported. And I think that's one of the big things that in the face of racism and one of the things that I also got from this paper was the need to also show solidarity in the face of racism with Black people, Indigenous peoples as well. And, a lot of our narratives of colonialism and immigration, they're often Eurocentric. They're often dominated by humiliation and oppression at the hands of racists. But I think that it really does speak to a lot of the cross-cultural communities of mutual support between racialized immigrants and Indigenous peoples, and in reflecting on resilience and community building in our present day. I really think that it really spoke to these historical communities as an active resistance against systemic racism. And, really thinking about what you were saying about belonging, it really does come back to, on whose terms do we belong, and what are we sacrificing in order to belong. And, one of the things that Howard had referred to in terms of when I'm coming as one of the student senators and members of the Board of Governors is that I am also one of the few people of color that has been a elected student board member at the University of British Columbia in the past few years. And so it's something that is incredibly rare as well. So I think that it is that I wonder, was there something that I also had to compromise and appeal to appeal to people who were voting, for example? And so I think about all of the different intersections of oppression, especially considering that it is Pride Month and all of that, and there still exists to be a lot of homophobia and transphobia in the Chinese Canadian community. And it really got thinking about all of the different intersections of oppression that we also need to address within our own communities, and how we can show solidarity for other communities too that are also facing this crisis around racism and white supremacy as well. So I thought that was a wonderful paper, and I think that this is something that, in this heightened in this age where we have heightened awareness around racism, Black Lives Matter, and Indigenous land defenders, that we can really support each other as a mutually supportive community against white supremacy. So I really wanted to hear your thoughts about all of these other, how we're addressing intersections of oppression within our own communities as well too.
And the intersections of oppression, which I know is very much talking to the alliance discussions and Henry, is that where you were taking it in terms of that? Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just in a quick response again, so that I'd love to hear from everyone. Again, as Joseph, Dr. Wong, I'd love to hear all these other examples. In fact, those case studies of what I didn't have the room to say, but you've experienced, and others who have been here, because I think that's part of the learning is and George is bringing this up, is that the paper uses elephants to kind of bring these conceptual elements of how we should take next steps. But in a lot of ways, the challenge is thinking of how we do this. Those of how we form alliances, of how we create coalitions, of how we don't replicate the kinds of exclusions that we've learned to do, how we don't replicate the kinds of divide and conquer, divide and rule tactics that we've learned. And that's the thing. There's a very famous, can you take down the master's house using the master's tools? And that comes from again, long civil rights struggles of African Americans who can you use those same tools that have been weaponized against you in order to get where you need to go? And so again, if we're going to replicate some of the exclusions that perhaps do exist in our communities, and look the other way, can we actually create a more just and inclusive society that we want? Can we create a better table if we're using the same tools? And there's going to be a limit to the sort of hammer and screws and nails, and whether we're going to use a nail-less table. But I think that sense of intersections. I'm going to reverse it too. For a long time, I've served at UBC, for instance, on a inclusion and the table committee. And for a long time, it looks like we were doing great on gender, that our gender equity. But without looking at it, it's like, wait a minute, though, women of color, they disappear every ladder rank you go up in our staffing and our managing. And so without understanding how, there is this intersection between race and gender, then we don't even see a problem. Because we got lots. It's great. Our male and female ratio is great up and down the line. We've done great work, and yet, in a really perverse and ironic way, the manifestation of white supremacy at UBC, in terms of management leadership, is that we achieve this while basically continuing to exclude women of color. So that's this example. I think that Georgia's. There's others, obviously. But it's I think a concrete way of understanding how, if we're not aware of that, those other legs, you end up chopping off a leg or thinking that you're doing something, and the elephant remains.
So we seem to be having like a 10-leg elephant right now. But Teresa, I'm going to encourage you to take off your chair hat for a second and just really speak to, I know that you have been really thinking about this topic so much from your own personal perspective, and I'd love to get your reflections from that point. We have a lot on our agenda for the next week, but let's put that aside for a second. Let's hear a little bit from you, Teresa.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I love the conversation that's happening. So Howard, if you need to stop me or give me a hint that I'm, please go ahead to do so. Because as I read Henry's paper several times over and listening today, just so much came to mind. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Henry for this paper. I concur. I'm going to try to be succinct. Some of the points that I've been jotting down. So I want to say I concur with Henry that we need to apply the proper language and proper names upon critical analysis. So language is important, and even more importantly, naming the issue is important. So there's a Confucius quote that says the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. And so what I was reminded, Henry and panelists, case in point is we've moved from cross-cultural understanding, valuing diversity, managing diversity, to the 1990s multicultural anti-racism organizational change that Joseph helped to actually start. I thought that was one of the high points. And then after that, diluted. Diversity, inclusion. So 20 years later, people cannot even name the issues of sexism or classism or racism anymore. So I think naming the issue, I think is important. Acknowledging racism exists, to understanding racism is institutionalized in our systems, education, 13 to 15 years of education, the media, public entities, workplaces to social institutions of religion and civil society, all institutionalized racism. So we need, and you are helping us to critically examine the roots of the problem. So it relates to issues that we are all uncomfortable to talk about. Issue of power, and issue of dominance, issues of privilege, and the word of white supremacy. I live in Calgary, Alberta. I came to this country, cannot speak English, and I was raised a Catholic all-girls school. So I think that I have to say, I agree, and I also struggled, given my geography, my own upbringing. So I want to say that, and also one of the points that really spoke to me is switch the focus from the focus on racialized to the root of the issue. That spoke to me. You reminded me of my first year of social work study, blaming the victims. So I think it's sort of another example of that. And then I think I'm going to skip I think our journey the last year, because I think when Henry mentioned that, I think that it has been a very difficult year. I've actually been doing this work for a very long time, 4 decades, but I would actually mark my consciousness raising to when Joseph actually organized the apology, the demand of the apology from the CTV program called Campus Takeaway. I think I was about 21, minus 28 degree. I was on that cold bus to Edmonton to protest, and I'm not a protester. And but then, after 40 years, last year was very, very difficult. The shooting of the 6 women was that was a very difficult week. So I think what happened to all of us, to me, last year was significant. But I think I would like to say, as someone who's action-oriented, I'm a social worker. I started 8 organizations. And when I look around at this plenary, I see a lot of action-oriented people. So I want to speak to a little bit of, that we need to take individual and collective action to change. That this is also the other aspect that I was reminded as I read this paper. So I want to say, I think while we need to have this kind of deliberation, this kind of examination, critical examination, and even go deeper to have those difficult, courageous conversations, I also think that I think we also need to acknowledge and also further examine those who actually sought a seat at the table. And as someone that actually sought a seat at the table in various ways, including running for public office and being a Chinese Canadian woman, being modest is so important to me. That it is something that I struggle, and through my training program, I struggle with others. I examine with others. But so when Henry used the example that when decisions are made by the dominant group, the white people, that did not think about what that decision would mean for people who are not white. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, when I had the table at the seat at the table as an MLA, I was one among 70 caucus members who identified the omission of immigrants and racialized seniors in the policy planning document on senior services. And that led to the change of the planning document. And when I raised the impact to racialized Albertans with the repeal of Section 3 of the Human Rights Code, that led to vigorous debates, forming of a special working group, all kinds of internal lobbying, and finally an executive decision not to change the code. So, of course, I had to defend and protect that code 2 more times during my time in office. And so I think what I want to say is maybe a question for Henry is how do we actually balance, of course, I totally agree that we need people who are going to seek a seat at the table to be grounded in our understanding the need and the struggles and the need of our people, that we need to have that social conscious, and that we need to go with a bigger purpose. But I would like to say that where's the balance between I think the conceptual conversation, the deliberation, which is important, which is foundational, and also to validate those who have had the seat at the table and did what we could. Joseph, when he was chair of the United Way in Toronto and started the multicultural anti-racism organizational change initiative, that was when I learned about the racist history of Canada. That's when I actually became committed to anti-discrimination work. So my question is, why is it that so many of the efforts of our community, collectively or individually, our show of resistance, not documented, not studied, not transferred to the next generation?
Thanks, Teresa, for there's so much in your comments, and I think they connect up with what Dr. Wong was also raising, which is, many of us who have been at who've had that seat at the table and have tried to make changes and have succeeded often. I think you actually put, right in your question is the answer. It's the forgetting. I think if there was one overall theme of the whole essay, was that we continually start from scratch, when we're blinded to then what happens is everybody's got to learn all the lessons themselves.
Yeah.
And when you're that first person at the table, and that's where I think the ACCT, the summit, and these gatherings like this is about sharing concrete examples. And that's what those of us, for instance, who've gone through and been constrained and limited and been at that table, and exactly what you said, Teresa, exactly what Dr. Wong said, there's 1,000 examples in our experience. Passing those experiences on so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so that 25-year-old, so Georgia now sitting at a table is not going to reinvent the wheel and try to figure out every tactic, and so these simple tactics of, if I'm going to remake this table, I got to find allies on this table. And how am I going to find allies on this table if I'm the only one who's not? Why? Well, okay, then I need some more strength outside the table. I need to actually have a gang who aren't at the table that I can use in some sense as a threat, as a leverage, as a wedge. These are these kinds of things that I think many of us have discovered the hard way, and that's what I hear in your comments, Teresa, is that when you became an MLA, when you're at that table, and many of us, fortunately, who get there, have a toolkit, the power of communities that are behind us, but that requires organizing.
Thank you. Georgia, I see you nodding during this conversation around that, and I'm interested to get your perspective, particularly. Do you feel supported now, being able to be at that table? Do you feel the knowledge that you have and is there for you, or how are you navigating this role now?
Yeah, I definitely feel like this is like, even seeing all of these different Chinese Canadian leaders and speaking out about racism, I think that feels really inspiring. And even seeing other people of color, like amongst my other governors and senators at UBC, it's very inspiring, because then you can share these experiences. But I think one of the things that is notable about working within a lot of these institutions is that if initiatives around equity and diversity and inclusion are not championed by those who hold the reins, then it's very easy to feel unsupported. It gets stoppered. It doesn't get. It's sort of like the grease on the wheels. Mm-hmm. And so you have all of these passionate people on the ground really making the work happen and all of that. But then you'll have people in the leadership who may also stopper it. So I think that I've found like a balance, I guess, like being inspired and feeling supported amongst my peers and other people of color, other Asian Canadians that I've really sought leadership and mentorship from, and people who have offered that mentorship. But it really does come from the people who are in leadership, and that's where I think where it's really admirable to create our own tables as well. And be able to support each other as something that is not just conditional, whether it is palatable to people who are, or white people who are in power, or people who occupy certain positions of privilege and power, but it is something that we agree to support each other and be able to move towards as a collective. And I think that's what I was kind of like hoping to get at with what I was saying earlier, that no one is no one is completely free until we are all free as well. So I think it's definitely been a mix of feeling supported and then also feeling unsupported when there's no leadership to champion these initiatives too.
Thank you.
I also would like to make a few comments. In a democracy, I think that we also have to play the rules of the game. For those who are at the table, it is only one person or two persons. But if they are not supported by our own community or the communities where they come from and represent, they are not effective. They will not be able to carry out the effective voices of the community. So it is very important. Number one, I think, of course, it is important to more Canadians of Chinese descent, of Asian descent, into different level of government at decision-making tables. We need to empower them. We need to make them effective by supporting them, so that their voice are being heard, so that people around the table know that he is not one person, so that he or she is representing many, many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. I think that is that is a very strong message for the Chinese Canadian community, because I often see people attacking others just because their opinion is different. Secondly, I quote one example that I saw. I think everybody know about that Jewish community in Canada has exerted a lot more political weight than the number represent, particularly compared with the Chinese community, because we are probably more than 5 times the population in terms of number, but we are less than 1/10 political impact. So remember one story that I read. There was in the New York office of a major Canadian bank, there was anti-Semitic comments, and the executive there refused to reprimand the person who made the comments. And this particular news conveyed back to Canada, and the Jewish community said, let us pull our money out of the bank. Overnight, they withdraw more than $50 million. I'm talking about 1950s. $50 million of deposit were taken out from the bank. So they have to comply. I think if the community act together, pull together, and that would give people a kind of confidence that if they speak out, they have the community behind to support them. I think that is a very important message, and that is the game that we are playing here in Canada.
Thank you, Joseph. Any response? What?
I think that idea that Dr. Wong just brought up again, that if you're alone, and Georgia spoke about this, and Teresa, I think, raised that challenge of if you're that only person saying it, if after a while you're going, I can't say it again because people have tuned me out. You have to have that set of people behind you. Not the whole community solid, because as we know, that's going to be weaponized as soon as someone says to you, oh, but there's some Chinese who disagree. There's some, therefore you don't. But, having that set of people behind you, doing that work to build the coalitions, build that kind of organization behind you, so that they can support, when needed. I think that's maybe the lesson really for all of us and it goes back to that question of what is leadership. We often reward that, this heroic lone person. We make a big deal out of that person who, for me in my life, I've actually never thought of myself as a leader. It's just, there's this problem. How do I define that problem, figure out all the people who are potential stakeholders that need to kind of realize that we got to solve this problem together. There are many leaders in that kind of model of leadership, that there's not one person who's got a singular vision. A vision has to be shared.
Mm-hmm.
And that hard work of a lot of people talking, listening, and saying, yeah, I think we can solve this. We have to even identify a problem before we can solve a problem.
That's right.
And when the problem is us, when it's anti-Asian racism is the problem, going back to, we blame the victim when the problem is named by the people who are suffering from it. We have to name the problem and find stakeholders, bring them together, get them on side together, trust each other. Trust building is huge. So all these things, which once that starts to be defined that way, who are the leaders? The leaders are all those who are working together on solving in a consensus and collaborative way a problem that they've defined together. And it's hard work doing that. And often it's behind the scenes. I'll give you a very concrete example. Back in the, in the freeway fight in Vancouver to save Chinatown and Strathcona, it was mostly, it was women behind the scenes organizing dinners and, but they weren't in the photos in the newspaper. It was these male leaders of a lot of the clan associations who ended up, they're the leaders. They get the photo ops. When 105 Kiefer, the fight, just several years ago, those young women who led much of the organizing, they were not hidden. That's the difference because they were the organizers. They brought people together. It wasn't just women, but they weren't hidden by the idea that there's a single leader that's the president or and so that heroic model of leadership, I think it's a detriment to us when we try to get things done.
May I say two things, Howard?
Of course.
It's not my job to keep time. So, okay, I just want to say, I think one is, I think some of the challenges, perhaps, and also opportunities and change. So one is because I think part of what Henry's paper is challenging us to think more critically and maybe to act more critically and consciously, which I totally agree. But I also want to raise that I have received, not many, a few threats, in my life. When I organized a petition to show the Chinese community's concern about mistreatment by the police, 2,300 signatures in 3 weeks in December in Calgary. I was threatened by the institution and people who did not like what I was doing, right? So now I also to be a privileged woman because I have a supportive husband and I don't always have to have a job. So, and then there's certain things that we have to tend to in our life, in different stages of life. So we have younger people, they might be very, passionate about these issues, but they still have to survive and support their family. There are certain times that I'm now 60. I still went to the Black Lives Matter protests when I was not supposed to, but then I also feeling more freer to speak now. So I think I just want to say that when you talk about coalition building, forming alliances, and knowing the challenge about the diversity, complexity of our own Chinese community, I think part of the future conversation, I hope, is how do we build that internal coalition and provide support to each other and be understanding of each other. And with that understanding, we can be more strategic. Maybe this is not the time for the 35-year-old brilliant lawyer to speak. Maybe it is for the 65 to protest, So I think that how do we actually have that kind of conversation? How, when I, my reputation in the Chinese community after I started 3 organizations was Chinese women who do not know their place go to Teresa's organization. And when I got funding from United Way, I was actually challenged by my own community. So how do we stop doing those things? And not only locally, but across the region, across Canada, across age, across sectors. I think those are some things we need to look at. And then how do we overcome our mentality about focusing on first, like you said in your paper, Henry, getting ourselves in certain positions. When civic is about solving problems, it's about actually not get kind of reward is actually the ability to live with ambiguity, is the willingness to do something that you may not get the desired outcome. Because in social justice work, we often don't get the kind of outcome we seek. So how do we actually challenge people who've been raised to say, this is the definition for success. This, you have to have those things to be considered that you have achieved your goal. It's not that you try. And so I think I'm also like to wrap up by saying, I think this conversation is, what the kind of people I see that are participating here today, not just the five of us, but, in this virtual space. I think that I hope that we're changing the conversation. I think we'll continue to change the conversation. I hope that we'll be very soon change the way we work together. You're on mute, Howard, I think.
I just wanted to say thank you to each one of you. This has been an exceptional start. I looked at our first section as an opportunity to actually set the stage and tone for the next 3 days. And actually, there's another day attached to all of this, which is to add to, after all of this conversation, we want to also gather again and say, what is our action moving forward? One of the primary objectives is this action plan for our community to advance our voice, our agenda, our relationship to the people and place in our country. And I think we're off to a great start because of your contributions. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for that. I wish you well on your conversation this afternoon, Teresa, with our Prime Minister, and I look forward to that tremendously with a great anticipation. As sort of the next step here, we're going to take a little break for everyone, 15 minutes back at the bottom of the hour. And then we're gonna have an opportunity for you to reflect with each other in some breakout rooms and some breakout areas, and continue that conversation. There have been enormously a number of great questions that were posed. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but this has been recorded. We're going to capture them all and determine ways in which we can actually address some of the real emerging issues that are evolving for all of you. So once again, thank you to our panelists, and thanks again to Dr. Henry, and to everyone for their participation. We'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Silman Kwok. I'm one of the members on the program planning committee of this summit. So I'm working with my colleague Randy Poon. In the next hour, we are going to work with all of you in the format of breakout room discussion and the report back. So Randy, do you want to speak something? To
introduce myself. My name is Randy Poon. I was a professor at Ambrose University. I led our business program and taught in that capacity, and now I'm an executive coach with Novus Global.
Thank you, Wendy. And before I explain to you about the process, first of all, I would like to ask for your patience. Please wait for a few minutes so that our ACCT facilitator and a note taker can take the seat at the table. So please wait for a few minutes first. So I'm going to use these few minutes to explain to you about the process. So in the next hour, the format is for 45 minutes for the breakout room discussion, and the last 15 minutes to report back. So in the breakout room 45 minutes, we are going to have two sets of questions for you, and we call it column A question and column B section. Column B question. For the column A question is focused on about the narrative. Is about how did you find the conversation among the speaker, the moderator, and among the panel member, how they related to your own experience. And the column B question is more about the action item. We want to ask you more of how do you relate all this kind of idea we just has discussed to translate them into the action item. So there are two sets of questions we're going to discuss. And we are also asking you to at least pick one question from each section. That means you're going to have at least one question on the narrative, one question on the action item. And because we are, as I say, we are going to ask our facilitator and the note taker going to each table. In case there's a no facilitator or note taker in your table, please coordinate among yourself and at least pick two questions, one from column A and one from column B. And then you're going to report back to us in the larger room in the last 15 minutes. So, and also last one is, I have two pieces of information from our technical colleague and we want to share with you. The first one is pick a table to start with the first set of table. And if a table is full, you can go to join another table. And if our team see a table is half empty, we will go in and ask you to kindly move to another table in order to maximize the conversation. And the second piece of information is we also add more tables. So now we have 29 tables in the summit. If you want to like, you went into the link before we did that 29 table. If you see only less than 29 table, you have to refresh your web page and see all the table. Please do that, yeah, so that you can see all the table. And last thing is, Wendy, do you want to add anything before we go to the discussion room?
No, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for each of you to be able to discuss so many of the great ideas and topics that Henry and the others shared. So go ahead and we'll have you join the tables in a moment. Again, we're going to have the facilitators and note takers join the tables first, and then maybe wait a minute or so, and then the rest of you can then join a table as Suming mentioned.
Yes, in the next 45 minutes, we are going to discuss the question, at least one in each section, all right, at the table. And then after you finish the 45 minutes, and then we will go back to the large group together for 15 minutes, so that we will ask you to report back to the larger group. So at least then we have a more understanding about what's going on in each table. We have a full discussion at the end.
I want to invite you, various participants from each of the various of the tables, to come up on stage with us. Don't worry, we won't bite. And to be able to share, maybe in a couple of minutes, what are some of the highlights in terms of either your response to either column A question, the narrative, or questions column B, which is the action points. So go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll invite you onto the stage.
Yeah, go ahead, raise your hand.
Okay, Eric.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. So yeah, so Randy also popped into our group a little bit. And I think one of the questions that kind of, I would say, stumped us a little bit was like, what does civic engagement entails? Like how do we define it? And I'm a pastor, so I raised the question of, does faith community play a role? And I think the consensus was like, yeah, actually faith community falls under nonprofit and all that. And so we had a conversation about that. Where does faith communities play a role? Look at Canada. So I'm from the Alliance denomination. and there's about 100 Alliance Chinese churches in Canada, and we count around 20,000 members. And I wonder, where do we fit in this? Does the church have any role in this, and how do we impact? And I think one of the things we discussed was that the churches tends to be much more reactionary rather than preemptive. And so these were some of the things we discussed. Why is it so, and how come we like that? And I think Randy and I, we all discussed that sometimes the topics that we focus on are the theological framework, the way we understand the world from our biblical perspective, from the faith perspective, is sometimes, I gotta say, too focused on particular topics that are not, I would say, contemporary. Can I say it like that? I would say contemporary. So, for example, why is Asian hate or BLM or LGBTQ not discussed? Why is politics not discussed? And I can see, as a pastor myself, I can see why it is very contentious. But at the same time, I think throughout the years, and this is not just a Chinese church, I think church in general has taken a stance where we will not touch this, especially politics, because that makes that unholy. That's kind of unsaid. And for me, I'm very frustrated at that, because I like to discuss these stuff. I come from a Dutch Reform background. Dutch Reform people are very into politics. So these are some of the things we discussed in our group. And I think the last point that our facilitator asked was, like, do we see any white supremacy or elements in the areas that are in? And I don't know if it's a white supremacy thing, but what I notice is that it almost seems to me the second, third, fourth generation prefers having a white Caucasian male pastor in their English services as a leader over let's say me, right? I don't know. So that's what I noticed when you put up a job board and you look at who applies. It almost seems like that is a preference almost, and it could be a cultural thing, but we don't know. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but that's an observation. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to go to another person here. Let's go to Xiao Chen.
Hello, can anyone?
Hi, Xiao Chen. How are you doing there?
Good, good. Oh, I have my camera turned off.
That'd be awesome. Great.
Oh, hi,
Can you do a
hi.
bit of a report? Can you provide a bit of a report back from your group?
So we had a discussion. One of the good discussion from I think it was Willie. He's I think a second or third generation Chinese immigrant that was from the generation that paid had tax, and he was able to become a municipal civil servant. And he was talking about his experience where as he was growing up, he actually didn't encounter as much racism as has seen nowadays, but he was able to kind of break through that minority mode, and was able to participate, be the first minority civil servant in the in their municipality, which is a great story. And he also emphasized on seeing the younger generations they're stepping up to be more vocal about the Asian communities, the issues that we face, and the challenge, and also trying to be at the table, which is very encouraging. Yeah, so that's sort of a summary of our group discussion.
Great. Well, thanks.
One of the highlight of our group discussion.
Thanks, Xiao Chen. Okay, great. Brittany.
Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Brittany. Welcome.
Hi, Randy. So for our group, we sort of discussed, one of the questions was the internal narratives that we needed to adopt in order to better engage with contemporary issues.
Sure.
And we talked about how with the model minority, rather than trying to redefine it, we want to break through and basically get rid of it entirely.
Okay.
And also stop like pushing for the model minority towards the younger generations as well, and pushing that narrative upon them. And also being aware of our history and how it affects our ability now to understand contemporary issues, and that we should be working together with other communities in order to not only understand our own history, but understand other communities' history in order to work together. And then also, to touch up to what the panelists talked about before, redefine what leadership is and what diversity is. At this moment, one of the speakers in our group said that she finds that leadership is too masculinized and also westernized. And so perhaps it's also time for organizations and for us to redefine what leadership is. That's it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany. Appreciate that. Okay, Tom.
Yes. Oh, okay. Hold on. Here I am. Yeah, I just want to respond to what Reverend Eric Wong, the first attendee, his comments about those with the Christian faith having a white bias. Is that when Black people make the claim that Jesus was Black, not Jewish, to not engage with them in a debate over, well, this is the biblical genealogy and all that. You have an open mind and allow for the possibility that Jesus was Black. Like, don't make it a major debate or issue.
Right. Yeah. How about from your table? Was there anything from your table that you wanted to address at all?
Ronald Lee, he has a good experience. He visited Johannesburg, South Africa, to get to know other cultures more, to be more culturally sensitive. He talked about going to the Soweto townships surrounding Johannesburg and the cruelty that racialized minorities, especially Blacks, face. I won't get into the specific incident.
Great. Okay.
But that the white minority that was ruling South Africa was in a way implementing the Canada Indian Act, and it became known as apartheid, and it led to the Soweto riots, which he compared to the civil rights movement in the United States. So I agree with Ronald about being culturally sensitive. I'll give an example. Like the Jamaicans, Caribbean food, Jamaicans make very good oxtail with peas and rice. And my father is a very traditional Chinese man. The Chinese restaurants make oxtail too, but I introduced him to the Jamaican oxtail, how they make it leaner and tastier. And I made my father, who's a very traditional Chinese man, into a big fan of Jamaican oxtail.
Gotcha. That's great.
And he still loves it.
That's great, Tom. I'm going to have I need to time for everyone else to join as well. But appreciate that. Love that, Tom. Let's go with Alan.
Hello. Oh.
Hi, Alan.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, our group picked the new internal narratives we need to adopt to better engage with contemporary issues. And we pick up about 5 points. One is the discussion of white supremacy. I guess that needs to be raised to the level of discussion, narrative, to talk about the ideology and so on. The second point is almost similar to the previous speaker on the concept of model minority. We need to move away from that because Chinese Canadians portray as hard workers, not leaders. and that kind of sometimes hamper the mobility into being a leader or into management. The third point is that listening, talking, understanding the issues. There's one of the group member talk about internal racism inside us. I think perhaps we might have stereotype in some cases that perhaps that maybe we don't get involved with other minority groups that need mutual support as well. There's a mention about the infighting, perhaps, or lack of cooperation among the Chinese Canadians. I think also we kind of talk a little bit about inclusivity versus diversity, because sometimes it could, like where you draw the line, right? 4 points on engagement. Maybe there need to be like ACCT to continue to expand on the topics on programs so that more Chinese Canadians could understand the issues and be better.
Okay, I just got cut off there. Do we have time still for another report back? Just want to get our organizers here, our schedule. We're at 12:30 right now. Sabrina, great, super.
Okay. Hi, this is Sabrina here. Our table is quite diverse in terms of gender, age, time in Canada, and our current location in Canada. We shared our personal experience. These experiences are different, but we all agree that there's racism exists in Canada. And the action item we suggest is we need to rally together, stand together, more events like this, the summit. And the key point is to make the invisible white elephant more visible.
Great. Well, thank you, Sabrina. I'm going to have one more. Ronald, I'm going to invite Ronald onto the stage. He's the last one here. We'll do it if you can keep it fairly tight, Ronald, and then Suming will wrap up, and then we'll pass it on to Patty.
Okay. I just wanted to add on to Alan's comments about some of the members felt that they did eternalize their problems, and they must learn to speak up. Speak up about the problems, and for some of the solutions possibly is start a mentorship program. As Teresa said, talk about the older people. They can provide advice and mentorship to the younger people. Tell them this is you should do this. I wouldn't do this at this time, right? Because they've gone through the ropes, and maybe on a website, let's have more shared experiences. And there's that. Racism project that Michelle Norris has, in 6 words, describe racism. We could do in 6 words, describe a Chinese Canadian, and then just put the comment. And if you want, you could put a whole narrative behind it. And there you get the personal experiences of things that people aren't willing to talk about. But that one 6-word statement will open up the floodgates. That's it.
Thanks very much, Ronald. Suming, why don't you summarize?
Yes, very rich discussion and conversation. It's very rich, actually. I'm trying to highlight 4 things. The first one is about how to name the problems. Teresa Woo Paw already said that we need to name the problem outright. For example, like white supremacy or even white preference for a white. And also, one of the tables say about report back about the internal racism as well. How are we going to create a tension within among ourselves in the Chinese Canadian community? The second point is about the internal narrative. How are we going to shape and reshape all the internal narrative among ourselves? For example, we discussed so much about the model minority, and also about like how as a Chinese, how to internalize all the problem instead of externalize them and discuss them. And also one more thing is about even the definition of our understanding of the leadership, the total term. What does that mean? We have to understand more about that kind of narrative as well before we move forward. The third point is about how to build our whole community, have a solid identity among ourselves, and how we can learn from our past, and then how we can move forward, and how the younger generation, younger Chinese Canadian can learn from the past effort and past experience. The last one is about how we're going to move forward. And as one of attending highlight already about the mentorship things, about how we're going to pass down our experience, our knowledge from one generation to the next generation, because we never want our younger generation always start from scratch. And then we need to pass that kind of, we call it, in academic term, we call it knowledge transfer, how we're going to transfer our experience and knowledge to the next generation, and which is the key one. And that's exactly the reason why the ACCT organized this kind of summit. And this is the first and the right step. And thank you so much. And also thank you to you, Randy, and thank you to all attendees. And we are going to pass the stage to Patty to wrap up the whole summit on the session 1. Patty.
Thank you so much, Su-Ming and Randy. Again, for all of you joining us, these two are members of our programming committee and have been critical participants in the program that not only you experience today, but what you will also experience in the next 3 sessions tomorrow, and then again on June 25th and 26th. So if you enjoyed today's session, by all means, please come back and join us for those sessions, which will be equally provocative and evocative, and invite lots of participation and discussion. And for those of you who submitted questions during the earlier fireside chat and panel conversation that we maybe didn't get to, or put questions in the chat and in other ways, we will be we have collected those questions, and we're going to try and address some of them in Mighty Networks. So earlier today, you recall me saying you could join the Leadership Summit Network on Mighty Networks. You would have received an invitation to join that link when you registered for us. We can try and put that link again into the chat. So if you don't know where to find it, that you can just go to the chat and find it. Because we'd love to continue the conversation between summits. I think one thing we've heard today is keeping the conversation and the dialogue going, keeping these connections. I know in my breakout group, we had one member who said, in the work that I do, I'm the only Chinese person I know and that I see. So I don't get to have these conversations within my work cluster. So could this be a way for us to find connection, which I think is a wonderful opportunity. Now, speaking of which, we are going to go into another, not quite 30 minutes, because I know we're running a little bit behind, of more networking. But this time, we're going to invite you to join tables that are hosted by a variety of VIPs and Chinese Canadian leaders who are recognized across the country for their contributions. So I'm going to give some instruction to go there, but before we do, we always want to hear back. We always want to know your thoughts about how you felt about today's session. And in the same right-hand side of your screen where the chat and the Q&A is, you'll also see a tab that says polls, and I'm just clicking on it right now. And Donna has added a question that we'd like you to answer about how did today's session resonate with you. We've got 3 questions. So if each of you could go to the polls tab and just answer the question and vote right now, that would be great. And it starts to give us an idea of how people are feeling about the summit's sessions so far, and gives us a chance as organizers to change the questions. So everybody voting. I can see my little bar eventually going across. So Donna, give me the cue when you're ready to go to the next question. And there we go. We have the second question. What level of new insight did you gain from today's session? And again, voting, hit the vote button. Fantastic. And then our third question. Based on the insights you gained today, what level of new or upgraded actions will you take? And click on your vote. So we're going to compile the responses to each of those questions. It helps us as we think about the next 3 summit sessions and and future summit sessions as well. We'll definitely be polling again throughout the summit sessions. We'll be asking you for feedback. Please put it in the chat. Please add it to Mighty Networks. We want to keep this conversation going and not just wait for once a year when we can gather in this way. We want to find other ways to connect. And a good segue to moving on to quick connections and networking with our VIPs. So what we're going to do is, like earlier this morning, you can choose the quick connections, which is the 5-minute meetups one-on-one with plenary attendees, or you can network with a VIP who is sitting at a table. Now, in a moment, I'll tell you who's sitting at which table so that you can figure out which one you want to be at. We're limiting it to one attendee networking with a VIP for 5 minutes. And there'll be a third person who's a volunteer at the table to help just keep time as we try and cycle people through. I know that many of you will likely want to meet with a variety of these people. Please know that we'll make this available for all 4 of our summit sessions. So if you don't get to meet with a VIP of your choice today, we'll have many opportunities again over the 3 remaining sessions that we have. Again, as we did with the breakouts, please give us a few minutes to set up the tables. For those of you who are VIPs, please hang tight as the production team moves the tables right now. We'll let you know in the announcements, which again is on the right-hand side of your screen, that everything's good to go and the VIPs will be invited to take their seats first, and then attendees, you click on the table that you want to join as soon as we have the go. In the meantime, while you're waiting for that, the speed networking will be available, so you can click on that to do the one-on-ones with each other. So here is the list of people who will be sitting at their tables. So what you want to remember is the table number associated with the VIP that I will say now. So at table 2, Dr. Henry Yu from the Department of History, UBC, and Principal St. John's College, UBC. Table number 3 is Howard Yang, Vice President, former Vice President, Arts and Leadership of Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. Table 4, Erica Tao, Regional Director General of the Department of Canadian Heritage for the Western Region. That's table 4. Table 5 is Gary Marr, former cabinet minister for the government of Alberta and currently the president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. Gary's at table 5. Table number 6, one of our panel members, Georgia Yee, UBC student senator and board governor, at table number 6. Table number 8 is William Lau, former student union president at the University of Alberta, table number 8. At table number 9, Angela Chan, president of the Chinese Canadian Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto. Angela at table 9. Table number 10, Bami Wong, president of the Asian Business Network Association. At table 10 is Bami. Table number 11 is Willie Wu, a retired counselor. Table number 12, Judy Young, chair of the Mississauga Board of Chinese Professionals and Businesses. That's table 12. Table 13 is Emily Cheng, artistic director, Little Pear Garden Dance Company. Emily's at table 13. Table number 14, Catherine Ho, president, Chinese Cuisine and Hospitality Association of Canada. Catherine's at table 14. Table 15, Jennifer Chen, a Winnipeg School Board trustee. Jennifer at table 15. Table 16, Kevin Wong, co-founder of the Take Care Supply and vice president and COO of Delphic Research. At table 17, table 16 is Kevin. Table 17 is William Wei, Associate Dean of Business at Grant MacEwan University. That's table 17 for William Wei. Table 18 is Nathan Ip, Edmonton School Board Trustee and Consultant with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Nathan's at table 18. And table 19 is Lawrence Lee, City Councillor for the City of Red Deer. Table 19 is Lawrence Lee. So with that, we will invite our VIPs to go to their table numbers, as I've noted, and then you'll be invited to join them. And then one last thing, of course, is to remind you of our fireside chat with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That will be happening today at 2:30 Mountain Daylight Time. It won't be happening on AirMeet, so just a reminder that you'll need to go to the Zoom link that would have been emailed to you as a registrant for the ACCT Summit. If you didn't get that Zoom link or that email, then please contact us by going to emailing events@actfoundation.ca. Maybe we can put that in the chat. So events@actfoundation.ca, and we'll get that link to you in time to join us at 2:30, which is a hard start time. So try and sign in a few minutes early so that we are ready to go and you can experience the full chat that will take place between Prime Minister Trudeau and our ACCT board chair,